Very good question. Traits and characteristics are so when I speak with a lot of students, and I've helped a lot of young people come up in the business, and I always would ask them, what was your favorite subjects when you were in school? What were the things that you really enjoyed about learning? And when I hear things like, oh, I loved literature, I loved writing, I loved the art of storytelling, then that sort of gets me saying, okay, you're in the right area. More importantly, a really good reporter and good storytellers,
I'm almost 2 minutes.
they have this thing called curiosity. They're curious. Curiosity really is what leads you to develop your technique for research. Because if you, whether you're interviewing someone, whether you're hosting a show, no matter what it is in terms of the storytelling and the various disciplines that we have in media, you're going to have to research. You're going to have to prepare for the show or for the interview. And that really does start with your ability to find information, just like Christian was saying. He went and looked up my information so that he could even introduce me. So if you're introducing someone, you got to go and find out things about them. What are they currently doing? What was their road? What road did they travel to arrive at that current destination? So we have to be very curious. I think we have to develop techniques for research. I think using data points is very critical. So numerical data should not intimidate you because that's going to help you to substantiate whatever your hypothesis is. If you think somebody's the greatest player to ever play or the greatest athlete, you better be able to back that up numerically, right? You should have evidence. It's like being a good lawyer. You can't just make a statement. You better have evidence, exhibit A, B, C, and D to back up that premise. And if you're doing that, then you're going to be a good broadcaster. You're going to be good in this field of media because now you're making good points, but you're teaching people along the way. And I'll end it with this. When you are a broadcaster, if you're working whatever your platform is, I don't care if it's a podcast, I don't care if it's a radio show or TV show, your listeners are doing one or two things. They're either learning or they're laughing. So you're either entertaining or you're educating. And if you're doing both, now you're really good. So you should start by doing one or the other. But to me, you ought to strive to do both. That's a really good question because you should always have an ear and understanding for who your audience is. And I thought that, okay, I'm doing NFL football over in London. So I did the pregame show that you may watch here in the morning. But if you're in London, you were watching myself, you were watching some of the other guys who were on the show with me. And so I was thinking, man, I wonder if they have a really smart, high football IQ here in London. How much do they know about our sport? And what I did is I did not want to underestimate and speak to them as if they were not very learned in that area. So what I did, I said, nope, I'm going to give it to them, but I'm still going to educate. I'm going to teach, going to talk about the game, but I'm not going to talk down to them. And boy, was I lucky because I would have really underestimated their football IQ. They are very astute, very bright audience, even when it comes to our sport. They know as much about our game as we in America know about our game. I mean, but they're very detailed oriented. They knew who the offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, who the special teams coach was to every single team, all 32 teams, because they don't have a home team that they target mostly. They literally learn about every single team because they don't have a team in London. So they have various people tend to pick various teams as their favorite team. So in one family, you might find someone who's a Patriot fan, someone who's a Jets fan, someone who's a Dolphins fan, all in the same family. Very interesting and a really good question, by the way. Yeah, I think they all married together, and it made me much better for the one that I really enjoyed the most, and that was being a game analyst in the broadcast booth. I think when you're calling a game and you're in the broadcast booth as an analyst, it's about the closest thing you can do that comes close to feeling like and getting the same sensation as when you played because you're using all of your faculties. It's spur of the moment. This isn't like WWF wrestling. This isn't choreographed. So you're literally talking about the action and it's happening real time, right? But a lot of your analysis has to be what we call highly predictive. Not that you got to predict what's going to happen next, but you should be close. You should be in the ballpark telling the viewers what they can expect based on down distance formation, based on the personnel groupings that are out there. And you should have a really good feel for everything that's happening down on that field. And you have to study not just your opponent. That's what we did when we were playing. I had to study my opponent. When I'm calling the game, I got to be very intimate and very knowledgeable about both teams. So it's a lot more work in terms of preparing. I remember we had Peyton Manning up in the broadcast booth as one of our hosts, as one of our guest analysis, and he was even shocked at A, how much we could see from up there, B, how much information we needed to know. Now, I only give that example because he's one of the brightest guys that I truly respect his football IQ. And even he saw that as a challenge. I'm sure Tom Brady in his current role with Fox Sports, I think he finds it challenging. That's why he wants to do it, because this is the closest thing that he could come to being out there actually playing.
Good morning, Mr. Wilcots. My name's Donnie. Is there something you learned as a player, like a habit, a detail, or way of seeing the field that you now rely on every time you analyze a game on broadcast?
Oh, absolutely. There are a lot of things, by the way. I played on the defensive side of the ball, so my job was to study the habits, the techniques of the offense. Why are we doing this? Because there's a tail in what they're doing. They're giving you indicators for what's about to happen after the ball is snapped. So we study the quarterbacks very intimately. We study the formations. We study the personnel grouping and what we call division of labor. The offense's job is to move the ball down the field, but there's certain strategies that they're going to use in order to do that. And there's certain people, certain players on the field they're going to use to do it. As you already know, there's 5 players who are eligible to get the ball on the opposing side, on the offensive side. They can't do certain things unless they're in certain formations to even get those guys the ball. By reasonable deduction, you're hedging as to here's what I think they're going to do with the ball based on this formation, based on their down and distance, and even how they're aligned and where they're at on the field. If they're on the plus 40-yard line going in, I know what to expect, depending on what down and distance. 2nd and 1, they're taking a shot deep down the field. They're going deep because it's called a waist down. They got an opportunity to take a shot throwing the ball deep down the field. So those are the things that we're always learning during our playing years, and those things you carry with you. You remember Malcolm Gladwell said it takes 10,000 hours, right, to become proficient at what it is that we do. So you never want to go into another job where you're learning from scratch, where you're throwing away your 10,000 hours of experience. Any job that you go into, one after the other, you ought to be carrying your previous life's experiences into that new opportunity with you. Therefore, you'll never be starting from scratch.
Morning, Mr. Wilcots. My question to you is, what does your typical preparation look like before you cover a game, and how much time usually goes into it?
Hours upon hours. So, for instance, today is Monday. I would get back from my game after calling a 1 o'clock game on Sunday. When I get home on Sunday night, it's very late. So, first thing Monday morning, I'm looking at the tape of the 2 teams that are going to be in my game that week. I'm looking at the game they just played yesterday, just watching the tape. Then I'm taking notes. I'm pulling all the numerical data. Then I'm listening to the press conferences of the coach, the quarterback, the players, and what were they saying coming off a loss? What were the important things they were saying after a big win? And so after that, now I'm starting to see what the matchups are going to look like. And so now I'm starting to see how would they play against this team. They're playing against a team in their own division. It's probably the second time they're playing them. So I need to go back and look at what did they do in the first game earlier that year when they played a team within their division, and how might that impact the next game. When we get to that town and arrive to do the game, we get there 2 days early on Friday. So I go to practice. We're meeting with the coach, the coordinators. So I'm taking notes, but I've already prepared for those meetings because I got to know what questions I'm going to ask them and what things I want to really target in my interview. You have to be very strategic because their time is very precious. I don't have all day. I don't have the time to ask 20 questions. I may get 5 or 6 questions with the quarterback. So I better make them good. They have to be highly targeted to get the most information out of those meetings that I possibly can. Even morning of the game, I'm still updating what injuries are going to impact the game, or do they have their starting quarterback or their starting running back? If they're without their two starting offensive linemen, what the backup guys are going to look like? What can I expect from them? What's their background? How much have they played or how little have they played? All of those things are going into the mental Rolodex to really play a role in my analysis. So you're always adding all the way up to kickoff, to be honest with you, because you never know what late breaking item is going to occur that could literally impact the game itself.
I mean, when you were in school, is this what you wanted to do, or did you figure it out when you retired from the NFL?
I knew this was what I wanted to do even before my mother put me on the plane and sent me off to college. I had 3 older brothers. I was the youngest of 4 boys, so didn't talk. You have to wait your turn when you have 3 older brothers. And I remember when she dropped me off at the airport. I grew up in Los Angeles, California. I'm going to school in Boulder, Colorado. And I remember she said, "So what do you want to study? What are you thinking about?" I said, "I want to be a broadcaster. I want to be a sports reporter." I knew that. And she said, "But you don't talk." I'll never forget. You know how a mother knows her son. And I said, "Mom, don't worry about it. It'll work out. I'll be okay." And even to this day, my 83-year-old mom, she's always telling me, I remember when I dropped you off at school, I didn't see it. You always knew what you wanted to do. And that's so amazing. She says, "I had no idea that you'd be good at that." She said, "But it turned out and you were right. It worked out." So yeah, I did know that's what I wanted to do. I got my degree in English literature, by the way, but I studied in our journalism school. But my writing skills were the things that really helped me. It's still the things that sustains me to this day because it allows me to create my own content. I do understand the art of storytelling, conceptualizing how to tell good stories. Where does that information come from? I get people who ask me, because I host a 3-hour radio show every single day, Monday through Friday. And I get people ask me, like, "Isn't it hard to come up with something to talk about?" And I'm like, "No." Because when you can develop the technique of how to tell stories and the art form of storytelling, and that's what I think my literature background has given me, then I'm never grasping at straws of what to say, how to say it, what to target, what bullet points are needed to help tell those stories. And I believe the NFL is big enough. It's a gift that keeps giving. And every week the storylines changes for 32 different teams. And in the offseason, when they're not playing games, you might wonder, what do we report on then? We cover the business of sports. The NFL is a successful multi-billion dollar business. It is one of the great success stories in our country. And it's over 100 years old. And so I get to report on the business and on how the money flows, how the player gets paid, how the teams make their money. And I find that very exciting because it changes things up for me. While I love talking about the sport, the on-field product, in the offseason, I love talking about the draft, free agency, who's going to get paid, how much they should get paid, and how the business of the NFL works, how the machinery, how it all works. That it allows me to exercise different muscles academically, but still cover the same sport. Yeah, and storytelling, remember, since human beings, the early humans, sat around a campfire, they just told the story. The guy who told the best story got to be the journalist. He was the guy that became the historian, right? And these stories got passed down from generation to generation. That's why we get stories like David and Goliath. You can go to any foreign land. There's going to be a David and Goliath type of story for that culture. The names might change, but there's going to be that similar type of story. And we find that in literature. No matter where you go, you're going to hear the same types of stories. but they were all spoken verbally before they were written down. So that's what you need to know. I would love to see you, but just get into the habit of storytelling. Isn't that what we all did around Thanksgiving? Like you listen to your granddad. If you're keen enough to listen, by the way, you should always listen to your grandparents when they're telling great stories, because that's how you're learning more about yourself. But somebody should be writing these stories down. So to your point, yeah, you should be taking the kind of coursework that allows you to become a good storyteller from a writing perspective, from a verbal perspective, but more importantly, you should be learning, you should be taking a business class too to learn about how to tell those stories. Because if you're going to cover sports is big business, whether you're covering Major League Baseball, NBA, you're going to end up talking about the money at some point. You're going to end up talking about how the business gets done and how the money gets made, how teams are being built economically before they're ever getting on the field to play. There's a reason why the Dodgers in baseball are the most dominant team. They have the most money. And if you can't tell that story, then you can't cover that sport. So you should also be taking those courses that allow you to understand how to tell those stories in a really creative way. Just one, people can talk and they can give one stat after another stat. What they're not doing is they're not using the data as a support system. They're trying to use the data as the driving force. And then when you start to when you start to layer your prose with too much numerical data, it becomes jumbled. Whoever's listening find it difficult to follow. Now, you can use the numbers to drive the premise of your story. For instance, if you are telling a story about the Rams who went into yesterday's game with a 6-game winning streak and they end up losing to a subpar team like the Carolina Panthers. Okay. Now, you just said they were 6-0, they lost to a subpar team. What makes them subpar? You should have numerical data to back that up. You already started with a team that's 6-0. Why would a 6-0 team lose to a team that you feel is not that good? It's probably something within that 6-game win streak that made them very vulnerable. That was like their Achilles heel, but no other team had been able to exploit it, and maybe the Carolina Panthers were able to. So that's how numerical data can help drive a conversation, but it shouldn't be so heavily layered in numbers. It should be more about the premise. It should be about making a statement, and then everything after that is helping to prove the statement. Again, think of yourself as a lawyer in court. You told the judge that your client is innocent. Everything you're saying after that is to prove his innocence. Whatever data you got, everything else is a supportive statement that comes back to that major premise. The more pertinent, substantive data points, right? That's just when we all learn to read, we always learn to, I think your teacher maybe would tell you, what is the main premise? What's the main point? What's the main idea? And you have, to me, when we're reading, that's what reading comprehension is really about, is being able to parse information and understand what is the important stuff and what's the non-important stuff. It's like when you go to dinner or you're at a buffet. You should know not all of that is good for you. Some of it's healthy, some of it is unhealthy. Some of it tastes really good, some of it doesn't. When you're pouring through information, when you're doing your reading, because I always look at reading and writing a bank account. When you're doing your reading, you're making deposits. You're pulling in information, right? And then when you go to write, you're making a withdrawal. You can't write about something unless you've gathered the information first. So when you're gathering information, when you're doing your information gathering, it should really be attached to the idea of what is going to help me tell the best story. What are the pertinent points here that are really that would help people learn or laugh, right? That's going to help people grow and come to me for information that they know is going to be insightful, that's going to be informative. And I think whenever you are a presenter of information, whether you're a radio host, whether you're a television host, whether you're the interviewer, you ought to stand for something. People should know that they're coming, that when they listen to Solomon Wilcots, they know they're going to get good information that's going to help them be better and make better decisions, even if they're in gaming, right? Even if their thing is to have a fantasy team or they want to bet on a team, they know that by listening to Solomon Wilcots, he's going to give me great information to make better decisions on how I stack my fantasy team, or maybe if I even want to do some betting on the side. This guy tends to have great information, reliable data points that I can use in what I do. So that's how I look at it. So I'm always taking notes when I'm reading, by the way. I never read without taking notes because I'm usually putting together my own data sheet so that later when I go to put it all together, I have maybe those top 10 things that I read from that article or from that information. I have those things listed where I can access them very quickly.